In the stillness of the night, under a canopy of countless stars, a lone figure stood by the banks of the Jabbok River. His heart was heavy, his past filled with schemes and betrayals, and ahead of him loomed a fateful reunion with a brother who had sworn vengeance. This man, Jacob, carried not only the weight of his mistakes, but also the burden of a divine promise, a promise that had shaped his entire life. But this night would be unlike any other. As he sent his family and possessions across the river, Jacob remained behind, alone, wrestling with his thoughts, his fears, and his future. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a figure appeared, neither friend nor foe, neither man nor beast. Without a word, the stranger lunged at Jacob, locking him in a struggle that would last until the break of dawn. With every twist and every grapple, Jacob fought not just against the mysterious assailant, but against his past, his doubts, and his very identity. Who was this stranger? Why had he come to Jacob in the dead of night? And what could be gained from a battle that seemed to transcend flesh and blood? What unfolded on that ancient riverbank would not only change Jacob's name, but also redefine his destiny, marking a pivotal moment in the story of God's covenant with his people. To understand the significance of this encounter is to uncover the profound truth of what it means to wrestle with God himself and to come out forever changed. Jacob's story is one of profound transformation, a journey that begins with deception and ends with a blessing that shapes an entire nation. Born into a family chosen by God, Jacob was marked by conflict even before he took his first breath. Wrestling with his twin brother Esau in their mother's womb, Jacob's early life was defined by ambition and cunning, often at the expense of those closest to him. Yet Jacob's life is not merely a story of personal struggle. It is a reflection of the human condition. How often do we find ourselves striving to control outcomes, manipulate circumstances, or earn blessings through our own strength? Jacob's story is a mirror to our own lives, a narrative that reveals both the cost of living by our own means and the grace that meets us in our deepest need. But what makes Jacob's journey extraordinary is not his flaws. It is how God meets him in those flaws, shaping him into a man who would carry the covenant forward. From his cunning schemes to his divine encounter at Bethel, from the heartbreak of family strife to the night he wrestled with God himself, Jacob's life is a testament to the relentless grace of a God who does not abandon his promises. In our time, Jacob's story remains deeply relevant. His wrestling with the angel teaches us about perseverance when the night is darkest. His eventual surrender shows us the power of trusting in God rather than our own strength. And his transformation into Israel, a name that means he who struggles with God, reminds us that even in our struggles, we are never forsaken. Over the next minutes, we will walk through the remarkable life of Jacob, tracing his journey from his humble beginnings to his defining encounter with the divine. We will uncover not only the historical and spiritual significance of his story, but also the lessons it holds for us today. What does it mean to wrestle with God? How can our struggles lead to transformation? And what does Jacob's life reveal about the character of the God we serve? Let us explore together. To understand the life of Jacob, we must begin at the very moment of his conception. Rebekah, Isaac's wife, had been barren for many years until Isaac pleaded with God on her behalf. God answered his prayer, but with the blessing came a prophecy, a foreshadowing of the conflict that would define Jacob's life. Rebekah felt an unusual struggle within her womb, and when she inquired of the Lord, he revealed this profound truth.
2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples will be separated from within you. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.
Genesis 25:23. When the twins were born, the prophecy became clear. Esau the elder emerged first, red and covered in hair like a garment. But grasping Esau's heel was Jacob, a name meaning he grasps the heel, or he deceives. From birth, Jacob's life was marked by striving, an image of his persistent determination to get ahead, even at the expense of others. As the boys grew, their differences became even more apparent. Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the open country, favored by his father Isaac. Jacob, on the other hand, was a quiet man who preferred to stay among the tents, favored by his mother Rebekah. Their contrasting personalities were not just personal quirks. They represented two different ways of life. Esau, driven by impulse and physical strength, and Jacob, guided by strategy and ambition. This division would culminate in one of the earliest defining moments of Jacob's life, the day he obtained Esau's birthright. One day Esau returned from the field famished, and Jacob was cooking a pot of stew. Seeing an opportunity, Jacob made an audacious proposition. "Sell me your birthright," he demanded. Esau, driven by his immediate hunger, agreed, declaring,
"What good is a birthright to me if I am about to die?"
Genesis 25:31-32. At that moment, Jacob secured the rights of the firstborn, a double portion of the inheritance, and the spiritual blessing that came with it. But at what cost? Esau despised his birthright, but Jacob's actions revealed a man willing to exploit even his brother's weakness to get what he wanted. This early episode paints a vivid picture of Jacob's character, resourceful and determined, but deeply flawed. Yet it also reminds us that God often chooses imperfect people to fulfill his purposes. Jacob's actions were not without consequence, but even here, God's plan was unfolding. The younger would indeed rise above the older, not by chance, but by divine design. And so began the story of Jacob's relentless pursuit of blessings and ambition that would shape the rest of his life. Jacob's life is a powerful demonstration of God's sovereignty, his ultimate control over all things, even in the midst of human weakness and failure. From the very beginning, Jacob was marked by imperfection. He deceived his brother Esau, manipulated his father Isaac, and later wrestled with his uncle Laban. Jacob's story is filled with moments where his own actions created chaos, yet God remained faithful to his promises. This teaches us a crucial lesson. God's plans are not dependent on our perfection. The covenant with Abraham, passed to Isaac and then to Jacob, was a divine promise that would not fail, no matter how flawed the human participants were. God did not choose Jacob because of his righteousness. He chose him because of his sovereign will. Take, for example, Jacob's deception of Isaac. In human terms, it was a terrible betrayal, stealing a blessing meant for his brother. Yet even through this act, God's plan unfolded exactly as he had declared to Rebekah before the twins were born. The older will serve the younger. This doesn't excuse Jacob's actions, but it reveals that God can take even our missteps and use them to accomplish his greater purpose. How often do we feel disqualified from God's blessings because of our failures? Jacob's story reminds us that God's sovereignty is greater than our mistakes. He is not limited by our shortcomings. Instead, he works through them to bring about his divine plan. Even when we fail, God's plan remains steadfast. When Jacob fled from Esau's wrath and found himself alone in the wilderness, God met him in his brokenness. In a dream at Bethel, Jacob saw a ladder reaching heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it. God spoke to him, reaffirming the covenant made to Abraham. In Genesis 28:15. Despite his deceit, God extended grace, not because Jacob deserved it, but because God is faithful to his promises. This is a lesson we can apply to our own lives. How often do we feel the weight of our imperfections, believing that our failures disqualify us from God's blessings? Yet Jacob's story shows us that God's purposes are not thwarted by human frailty. If he could use a deceiver like Jacob to fulfill his covenant and bring forth a nation, he can certainly work through our lives as well. When you face moments of failure or regret, remember that God's grace is greater than your mistakes. Trust in his sovereignty, knowing that he can use even your missteps to accomplish his plans. Jacob's life assures us that our God is not a distant observer, but an active participant in our lives, guiding us, redeeming us, and fulfilling his promises despite our flaws. Just as he remained with Jacob through every trial, he remains with us, turning our brokenness into blessings for his glory. When Jacob wrestled with the angel at the ford of the Jabbok, it was more than a physical struggle. It was a symbol of the spiritual battles that define our faith. Alone in the darkness, Jacob faced a figure who appeared out of nowhere, locking him in a relentless struggle that lasted until dawn. But what was this wrestling about, and why did God allow it? To understand the significance, we must recognize that this was not just a fight for survival. Jacob's wrestling with the angel represents the inner struggle that every believer faces at some point. The tension between fear and faith, between self-reliance and surrender, between holding on to the past and stepping into God's promises. Jacob was not a stranger to struggle. His entire life had been a series of battles against his brother, his uncle, and even himself. But this moment was different. In this wrestling match, Jacob was not fighting for control, he was fighting for a blessing. He refused to let go of the angel, even when his hip was dislocated, a painful injury that left him limping for the rest of his life. His words echo the cry of a desperate heart.
I will not let you go unless you bless me.
Genesis 32:26. Faith doesn't always come easily. It requires wrestling through doubt and trials. In many ways, Jacob's wrestling mirrors the spiritual struggles we face today. Faith is not always simple. It often requires us to confront our doubts, endure hardships, and persist in prayer even when answers seem distant. Like Jacob, we find ourselves in moments of darkness, wrestling with God over our fears, our failures, and our future. Yet it is in these moments of struggle that our faith is refined. Consider this. Jacob emerged from that night with a new identity. The angel declared, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Genesis 32:28. The name Israel, meaning one who struggles with God, became a mark of honor, not shame. Jacob's perseverance in the struggle was not a sign of weakness, but of spiritual strength. It was through his wrestling that he profoundly encountered God and received the blessing that would define his destiny. What are the lessons learned from the story? Struggles are part of growth. Faith is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to persist through it. Like Jacob, we may face seasons where it feels like we are wrestling with God himself. Seasons of unanswered prayers, difficult decisions, or spiritual dryness. Yet these moments are growth opportunities. Perseverance brings blessing. Jacob's refusal to let go teaches us the importance of persistence in our relationship with God. When challenges arise, do we give up or do we hold on, trusting that God will bless us in his time? God meets us in the struggle. The wrestling match was not a punishment, but a divine encounter. God initiated the struggle, not to harm Jacob, but to transform him. Similarly, our struggles often become the very place where we encounter God's presence most powerfully. Practical application. When facing trials, take them as opportunities to deepen your faith. Persist in prayer, even when answers seem delayed. Trust that God is working through the struggle, shaping you for his purposes. Jacob's limp became a permanent reminder of his encounter with God. It was a physical sign of his perseverance and transformation. In the same way, our struggles may leave marks on us, but those marks tell the story of God's faithfulness. The night may be long, but like Jacob, if we hold on, the dawn will break, and we will see God's blessing unfold in our lives. The moment Jacob wrestled with the angel marked a turning point in his life. But it wasn't just about the struggle, it was about transformation. By dawn, Jacob was no longer the man he had been the night before. His name, which once meant supplanter or deceiver, was changed to Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. This name change was not a simple rebranding. It was a reflection of how God redefined Jacob's identity and purpose. Throughout his life, Jacob had lived up to his name, relying on his cunning to outmaneuver others and secure blessings. From deceiving his father Isaac to tricking his brother Esau out of his birthright, Jacob's life was a series of self-driven schemes. But in this divine encounter, God revealed that Jacob's true strength would no longer come from deception, but from dependence on him. This transformation teaches us a profound truth about God. He sees not just who we are, but who we can become. God did not define Jacob by his past mistakes. Instead, he called him into a new identity and destiny. By giving Jacob a new name, God declared that his future would not be determined by his past. Jacob was no longer simply a man running from his mistakes. He was now the patriarch of a people chosen by God to carry his covenant to future generations. This is the heart of God's transformative power. He meets us where we are, but he never leaves us there. Just as he redefined Jacob's identity, he can redefine ours. Perhaps you felt weighed down by past failures, poor choices, or the labels others have placed on you. Jacob's story reminds us that God is not limited by our flaws. He calls us by a new name, a name that reflects his purpose and plan for our lives. Jacob's transformation foreshadows the many moments in Scripture where God redefines his people. Abram became Abraham, the father of many nations. Sarai became Sarah, a mother of kings. Simon became Peter, the rock upon which Christ would build his church. Each of these name changes symbolized a new identity and mission given by God. For Jacob, his new name, Israel, reflected the deeper truth that his life would now be marked by his relationship with God rather than his efforts. He would no longer strive alone but would live as one who wrestled with God and prevailed through faith. Lessons for today. Your past does not define you. God is not confined by your mistakes. Like Jacob, you can step into a new identity shaped by his grace. True transformation comes from encountering God. Jacob's life changed because he met God face to face. Transformation begins when we surrender to God and allow him to work in us. God gives us a new name. Whether it's through forgiveness, redemption, or calling, God speaks a new identity over his children. You are no longer defined by what you've done, but by who God says you are. Reflect on areas in your life where you've been holding on to old identities or past mistakes. Seek God in prayer, asking him to reveal the new name and purpose he has for you. Trust in his ability to redefine your story, just as he did for Jacob. Jacob's new name was more than a title. It was a promise of the man he was becoming. He walked away from that encounter limping, a physical reminder of his struggle, but also blessed and transformed. In the same way, our encounters with God may challenge and change us, but they leave us renewed with a clearer understanding of who we are in him. God doesn't just see your present, he sees your potential, your calling, and the destiny he has prepared for you. Jacob's life is filled with unexpected twists and turns. What part of his story surprises you the most? Is it his persistence, his transformation, or his encounter with God at the Jabbok? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Jacob's incredible journey, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We explore the lives of biblical figures in ways that bring Scripture to life, uncovering lessons that inspire and challenge us today. Don't miss the next story that might change your perspective on faith. Jacob's story reminds us of the transformative power of God's presence, even amid our struggles. Who in your life needs to hear this message of perseverance and grace? Stay strong, keep faith, and trust that God is working in your life as he worked in Jacob's. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to walking with you through more incredible Bible stories in the future.